Greetings, everyone. This is Rambling Collector, back here with another book review for all of you today. And this will be another indie author review with the first book of the Kingdoms of Color series by Morgan Takala, Stone of Hatred. So I was actually lucky enough to meet Morgan Takala as well as interview her at a recent Comic-Con in Owensboro. And if you haven't checked out the interview yet, please feel free to do so. She was a wonderful person to talk to, super fun to interview, and as of right now, I'm very curious to read more of her books in the future. Because Stone of Hatred was sorely needed after the absolute headache that was Ricky Simons' book, Hitherto a Lion. It wasn't a bad story, but Stone of Hatred was definitely a lot easier to follow. I can honestly say I finished it within a few days, and I only apologize that it's taking me so long to do a review for it, because I've been on vacation, folks. I've sorely needed it in order to catch up on some reading, but this one here I've needed to talk about. With that being said, let's get started. So, to begin with, my overall thoughts. Stone of Hatred acts primarily as a setup novel for the series of Kingdoms of Color, because in my interview with the author, they stated that the entire Kingdoms of Color series would be more of an adventure story, of traveling from one location to another. However, that does not detract any points from Stone of Hatred. In fact, it was actually really well done as a setup piece, introducing us to our characters, as well as setting up the world that this story will be taking place in. Not anywhere on Earth, but on a random planet out in the far galaxy. Which is actually a pretty interesting idea, because it could imply that humanity does exist somewhere out in the cosmos, but we are going to focus on another planet. Anyways, so our main characters here were Crimson, Ruby, and Millie, short for Vermilion, who are the three royal siblings of the King and Queen of the Crimson Kingdom, one of the many different kingdoms throughout the planet of Hue. It is so named because there are multiple different lands, each with a different colored people. You have orange, blue, yellow, and then right smack in the middle you have the gray zone, which is inhabited by the grays, whites, and blacks. And in my opinion, that is actually a pretty unique setup in my opinion, having it where you have all these different kingdoms of color, each one being based off of a various shade of red, or a different shade of yellow, or orange, or any particular other type. However, one of the things I definitely enjoyed was that Crimson, Ruby, and Millie were all very well done characters, each one with their own motivations and internal thoughts. And I really enjoyed how each chapter or two, it would switch perspective between the three siblings so that we would actually get to know what's going on in their head. For instance, Ruby herself feels frustrated that she was essentially passed over, despite being the oldest child, because of the old thing of son comes before daughter in the royal heritage. Which sucks, but at the same time it causes her to have this sense of entitlement of thinking, I know better than these folks, I want some more adventure, and I'm tired of having to play babysitter to someone who is the crown prince who doesn't seem to take their job seriously. But then when you get to Crimson's point of view, you find out that he is really hard on himself because he knows and understands very well that he has a responsibility on his shoulders of being the crown prince to the Crimson Kingdom, but it is not a responsibility that he wants or that he feels he is able to do. In fact, he states plain as day that his younger brother, Vermilion, would be a much better candidate for the throne than himself. And to those of you who've ever felt that sort of imposter syndrome of thinking, I don't belong here, this one should be able to take it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have felt that, and it really, really sucks. Especially when you're in a royal family like Crimson is. But as for Vermilion, he's a character who I can honestly relate to as a fellow book nerd who's always like staying up late trying to finish another story or things like that, which I wholeheartedly felt that in my core and related to that. But I also felt myself relating to Crimson and Ruby in some cases because with Crimson, it's always the problem of feeling like you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders and it's a lot to bear. I just feel this feeling like I am not capable of this. Someone else should take this responsibility, not me. I'm not built for this. Whereas then you have Ruby, who is frustrated with the fact that she is constantly stuck in the same thing day in, day out, and she wants more. She wants to be able to actually proactively help the kingdom. But anyways, another thing I liked was the interesting plot device that they used, because with Ruby, she has something called a prem, which is short for premonition. In other words, she has vision-like dreams throughout the story that allows her to see certain events that are going to happen. And from there, we actually see how this plot begins. For instance, we have it in the gray zone, where these folks who are trying to bring their kingdoms back to prominence, because they are essentially now in a blasted wasteland, they decide to go after this multicolored stone, which each facet of it contains a different negative emotion. For instance, the one here is a crimson stone, but it's filled with raw hatred. And it actually infects Crimson after he tries to pick it up, and it starts fusing into his palm. And it starts filling him with just absolute raw pain and agony, as well as a nagging voice in the back of his head that is just filled with raw vitriol that he constantly has to wrestle with throughout the entire book, as well as it physically draining him of energy completely. And I like that kind of plot device where it shows that there is this stone or different shards that embody these various negative emotions. In fact, the next book in the series, which is Stone of Avarice, which will definitely be a much larger book in the series, I can guarantee you that, with this one only being at most 311, with Stone of Avarice being in at least the 400s. Am I excited to find out more? Absolutely. Anyways, I think I've rambled on enough. Let's go on to random thoughts here. So, random thoughts here. Personally, I have mixed feelings on Ruby, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I understand the frustration of being passed over just because of the old laws and such, but that is no reason to just constantly judge your sibling because they act out a little bit. Like, sure, Crimson's jokes did get out of hand. Like, at one point, he actually, unintentionally of course, caused Ruby to break her arm after icing up the stairs and causing her to fall down, which, in my opinion, was incredibly stupid. Like, I understand you might have been trying to prank somebody else or something, but dude, look or think before you act. Like, I understand he does it because he's frustrated and he's constantly trapped in the royal heir issues, but if you constantly feel the need to prank your sibling and you actually cause her harm, maybe that is a moment you need to stop and think for a second. As for Ruby, though, her problem was that she had this one-sided track note of Crimson of just being a constant troublemaker, having to be his binder, his keeper. And at one point, she snaps at him. Like, she unloads everything and all of her frustrations right then and there in that one pivotal scene. Like, right after they've just found the rock, it's causing Crimson pain, and she goes from just caring about him and trying to make sure he's at least feeling somewhat better. And then, right after that, during breakfast, when the family is all gathered around and trying to figure out what the hell is going on, she just flat out snaps. I actually have a thought on that it might have been the stone at the time exuding a sort of raw, I guess, presence, I think. Because it felt like everyone there in that kitchen was just short from snapping. You had Vermilion, who was angry. You had Ruby, who was absolutely snapping. Crimson, at least, finally yells and lets out his own emotions too. But that's because he has more raw exposure to the stone. I feel like that is a moment where all that negative pent-up emotion was just boiling to the surface. And while I am glad that it is going to set up the plot further, it felt somewhat out of place, but also needed. I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted on that one scene. Because it felt like Ruby at that moment, it was just like wrong place, wrong time, but at the same time, it felt like it was needed to move the plot forward. I say again, I am very confused on that scene, but regardless, I do think this novel flowed very, very well, in my honest opinion. As well as, I'm very curious to see how they're going to explain how the blacks and whites, how they, who are thought to be extinct, are actually still alive. And I'm wondering, is there a secret underground network going on or something in the gray zone? I'm relatively curious and genuinely wanting to find out more. But anyways, let's move on to the score, shall we? So overall, I feel comfortable enough putting Stone of Hatred at a solid 9 out of 10. It is a bit slow at times, but I think that's just because, like I mentioned before, primarily it is a set-up novel. That is why I'm very excited to see what Stone of Avarice is going to be about, because that's where the main journey is about to begin. We do see its beginnings at the tail end of Stone of Hatred, but Stone of Avarice is where it is really going to take off. And I'm very curious to see what's going to happen to Crimson, Ruby, and Millie in the future installment, because not really going to spoil anything, but I will say that a lot goes down in the second half of the novel. And I would personally recommend, if you want to find out more, to check out this book for yourself, as well as the series in general. Or, if you guys want to see some of the other indie authors that I've talked about, feel free to click the link to that playlist here. Or, if you want to see some of the other books that I've talked about in general, feel free to click the link to that playlist here as well. And once again, you guys, thank you so much for listening to this crazy man's ramblings. It really means a lot if you stuck around to the end of this video. And, personally, I feel like indie authors do not get enough attention as they deserve, for both good and bad reasons. And in my opinion, there's a lot of creativity there that deserves to be shown. Anyways, you guys, thank you once again for listening. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, comment your thoughts down below, or subscribe if you're interested for more. This is Rambling Collector signing off for now. Have a great day, my fellow readers. Keep up the amazing reading.